I'm going to turn it over to today's moderator, Kevin Salmen. Kevin is a VP with JLL, where his work includes an emphasis with tenant rep and corporate services. And well, he's an all-around good guy.
Thanks, Tony.
It's all yours, Kevin.
All right, greatly appreciate it. And thanks everybody for hopping on. It looks like we've got a pretty good audience this morning, and a really good group of speakers here. Just kind of a quick FYI as to how I got involved in this. Spent the majority of my career prior to real estate in technology, and the 2 years prior to joining JLL, I was working over at General Electric doing building intelligence, Internet of Things solutions, and obviously got pretty knowledgeable around this topic of conversation. And when I started in real estate, I was at another association's meeting and met Brad, and he was talking about some of the topics that we're going to cover today. And he invited me to a big TC building intelligence group, Twin Cities, and I got to know a bunch of other people that are really smart and knowledgeable and doing cool stuff in this industry. So I'm happy to have been a part of putting this group of people together. So as you can see, and I think if we go to the next screen, it may show you the different panelists that we've got here. But Brad Kult is at HGA, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, architecture and engineer firm. He's director of technology, planning and design over there, and focuses on low voltage building systems, audio, video, security, telecommunications, building automation. So he really has a super deep background in all of this information that we're going to be covering today. We also have Steve Washburn, who's business development manager at Convergint Technologies. For those that are not familiar with Convergint, they're a global integrator of connected Internet of Things technologies, including surveillance cameras, card readers, fire life safety systems, and other building technologies. And last, but certainly not least, we've got Adam Beson as the handsome gentleman there, given the kind of sideways finger gun in his LinkedIn photo, which we have given him plenty of flack about over the past month during these planning meetings. Adam's a director of digital sales for Zurn Industries, which is a national leader in commercial building plumbing solutions. Prior to joining Zurn, he was with 75F, so he focused on HVAC solutions and connected technology. So really, if you step back and look at this group of individuals, they run the gamut in terms of their knowledge around, intelligent buildings. And just a couple things before we get kicked off here, I will reiterate Tony's comment about submitting questions via the chat. We've got some prepared content for you today, but I have found these meetings to be the most beneficial when we're taking questions from the audience and addressing things that people have specific questions on. And then last but not least, there will be 2 questions, as Tony mentioned. You need to answer those if you're looking for continuing education credit, but the questions that we're asking are also related to this topic. So even if you're not looking for CE credit, we would love for you to respond, just so we can get a little bit of information on kind of the audience and what the current state in their organizations is regarding intelligent environment. So I think first and foremost, to be sure that we're all starting from the same spot, I'll hand it over to the panelists, and they can give kind of their perception of what an intelligent environment is, so we can start from the same foundation and build from there. So I'll hand it over to Brad to probably kick it off.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, NAIOP, for having us here today. We're excited to be able to talk about intelligent buildings. I find that the folks of us who are interested in this are very passionate about it. There's nobody who's lukewarm. You're all in, or you're interested in learning about it, or maybe not indoctrinated yet. So intelligent buildings are a little bit difficult to define. That's what we've found as we've been meeting over the last little over 2 years with our building intelligence group. And part of that becomes there isn't any definition for or any scoring system like there is for LEED or for well building. So we try and put some parameters around it, but we find it really depends on what type of industry people are in and what building type and what use cases that people have. So we're going to get into a bit more of that as we go forward here. But first off, we expect that the intelligent buildings can be characterized by a few of these things. Adam, you want to maybe take it away here?
Sure. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, so I think one definition, and to kind of start slow, if you will, for an intelligent building, could be something, as simple as connected thermostats, right? If we think about whether in personal residences or in a commercial office or commercial environment, what we're really talking about here is the ability for systems to do some intelligent thinking. One classic definition might be to do it in real time. So if you think about taking external data like weather forecast information and having a building be able to interpret that information and react in real time, it's something we refer to as being a predictive and proactive solution. So for example, today's heavy overcast weather means we don't have the solar gain coming in. An intelligent building might be able to interpret that data and adjust its HVAC load and demands accordingly. There are countless examples today that we could dive into, and obviously around the topic of COVID in particular, maybe I'll pass the baton over to speak to some of the safety measures. Brad, is that your topic, or are we? Is that Steve? Let me pass it over to Steve and talk a little bit more about safety and comfort.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And I think, like Brad indicated up front, and defining an intelligent building and thinking about what that means to us, it really does run the gamut. There's all types of different ideas. Some people think about it, I'll say, maybe in a way that is that electronic thermostat or just a more traditional manner. But some of the things that we're starting to see from a safety, comfort, and convenience is really what I think people are starting to look at or focus on from an intelligent buildings perspective. They want that building to, kind of recognize who should belong and who shouldn't belong. And in the world of COVID today that we're in, and all these challenges and concerns about whether it be not how many people are in the facility, whether it be, not touching things, or even just improving the number of air circulations or things like that. We're really seeing a lot of conversations and discussions about that. And I know that's probably a nice segue to talk about some of the benefits associated with intelligent buildings and the way we think about communicating and talking to different people about what those benefits are, because there are some nice I'll say formulas or ways that we talk about it. And this part here, the safety, the comfort, and the convenience side, I think is really gaining a lot of attention, where in the past it was really focused on maybe a more hardcore number like square footage and things like that. And maybe we could flip to the next slide and let somebody speak about the 330-300 rule, just so that we can again level set a little bit on some of the ways that we think about intelligent buildings.
Perfect. And I think we may have, Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, but we may have one quick polling question here for the audience between. Maybe not. Okay, there it is. So you should see it up on your screen there. And really, we're just trying to get an understanding as to, what percentage of the audience is in some type of smart environment. So feel free to respond to that, and then we'll put up the polling results for you. Questions are starting to roll into, depending upon kind of what the question is. I'm going to work it into the conversation if it's relevant on the topic that the panelists are currently speaking to. If not, I'll just wait and we'll have a question and answer session at the end.
One point I want to bring up before we move on and as we complete the polling is, so many different providers of different parts of a building, whether it's a fire system, lighting, HVAC, plumbing, access control, security. They're all creating smart and intelligent connected systems. And, one of the key points that we talk a lot about in the Building Intelligence Group, or Big TC, which is something that Brad Kult started just a couple of years ago, is, how does everything speak to one another? And for the purpose of today's conversation, we're not going to get into the technical side of integrations. But for those who are attending today, it's important to note that technology has never been more fluid, and the ability for those systems to work together is really unprecedented. Looks like we've got some data.
Yeah, definitely. And it looks like about 72% of the folks on the line today are in some sort of intelligent environment, whether it's, key card access systems, smart thermostats, automated lighting. 25% said that they are not, and 3% were not available. So that's what does the panelist group think of that? Is that a surprise to anybody, or is that kind of what you are seeing across the industry?
As Adam alluded to, we are seeing a lot more of the individual systems getting smarter. The cost for these sensors that pack all kinds of different technologies in them is coming down rapidly. And so it doesn't surprise me that we've got a lot of people who have some experience with this. And I think that the intelligent building is not a destination, it's a roadmap. So what I'm expecting is that where you're at right now is not where you're going to be at in 2 to 3 years, and 5 years, 10 years down the road. It's should be something that's scalable and expandable, and you're able to take what you have now and build on that to continue adding value. So we're going to see those numbers increase, and those other 27% are going to, in a couple of years, be able to say, yes, we have some of those intelligent technologies, and the people who already said yes are going to be seeing some more of the capabilities that those are going to be delivering to the different groups we see on this slide. So Adam, you want to talk to us a little bit about the 330-300 principle?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brad. And Steve alluded to this previously. And just as an aside, I'm pleasantly surprised with that data at 72%. That's great to see. It's great to hear. And, it is a growing trend, certainly. So I believe JLL originally coined the concept of 330-300. And I think for the almost 80 participants we have on today's call, we probably have a mix of owners, operators, and just individual tenants in commercial facilities. The concept's really very simple. A typical commercial building is spending $3 a square foot on those energy and utility costs. There's $30 a square foot in the real estate costs. You figure just the right to be in a facility when you burden a commercial building. And then the 300 is really the most impactful, clearly, and that is the human capital costs. So this is a very commonly referred to metric around intelligent buildings, because these technologies often play in all three of these buckets when it comes to realizing the potential impact that the intelligent building technology will have on the space. So just as a quick aside, we're talking about reducing utility costs at that $3 a square foot, space utilization and space optimization at a $30 a square foot premium. And really the top of the pyramid is around improving productivity, comfort, health, and well-being of those in the facility at that $300.
And this is something where we focus traditionally on energy. And now we're looking a lot more, and things like the well standard also help us focus more on the occupant and the well-being, and what is it that's going to be able to help those people be more productive and happy within their workplace or within any other types of buildings that they're in. And that if you take a 30, $10, $3, if you're able to impact that by 10%, you save what, 30 cents? You start impacting the $300 payroll by 10%, you're talking about real money. And so if we focus on the occupant and that experience, and you kind of know the energy is going to come along with that because these things you're putting in are going to help you have more insight in your building. You're going to be able to receive actionable intelligence from the building. That's part of what makes it intelligent, is that it has some self-awareness and is able to push that information to an operator rather than making them have to go someplace, seek it out, and then figure out how to interpret it.
So some of the, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say a good example of that in today's world, and Adam kind of gave us a little bit of a hint of that earlier, is, adjusting, the HVAC system based on expected or predicted weather temperatures. But another thing that an intelligent building would be able to do, and an intelligent building basically means all these various sub-technologies are working together, I'll say seamlessly, without human interaction or human, making a human do something, right? It's just the building is self-aware as to what's happening around it. So in today's world, imagine if, as Brad's coming into or Kevin's coming into the office, the HVAC system knew that Brad or Kevin was coming in and they were going to increase the air circulation in their office area, and targeting some of those actions directly associated with the planned and expected activities. And that could even potentially be a meeting that you have scheduled, a conference room. And these things are becoming super important for us, especially around this, this human element, right? So, and again, we've always focused on, the square footage, the real estate, kind of that 330 area. But we're really seeing a lot of interest now into that 300, that human side of it, the productivity side, and making sure that these buildings are safe and really reacting to the people and the use of them. And that's what gets super fun, and that's what we all get very excited about to talk about.
So we got some questions coming in around cost, which I'm sure you guys were all expecting to come up at some point in time. But, a few of the solutions that you've already referred to have a direct, dollar value ROI associated with them. There's also solutions that can be implemented that don't necessarily have a hard dollar savings associated with them. Two questions. One, how are owners, operators, people that are spending money on implementing a technology like this justifying that spend if there isn't a hard dollar ROI associated with it? And then the second question is, one of the audience members is wondering if there's been any kind of rough per square foot costs associated with rolling out a solution. And I'll ask that with the caveat that we all understand that can vary drastically. It's like saying, how much does a bag of groceries cost? If it's filled with T-bone steaks, it's going to cost you a couple $100. If it's filled with bags of Doritos, it's going to cost you $25. So if there's some kind of middle ground there that you can say, on average, to put in, 3-4 of the more basic systems, it's going to cost X number of dollars per square foot, that would be great.
Sure, that's a good question. I'll take a first stab at it. And I guess with the caveat, working in the lighting and mechanical and now plumbing systems, I've sort of gotten a flavor for those three large buckets that can often have controls or intelligent connectivity. If you're really driving for $1 per square foot cost of what is it going to take to become an intelligent building, it's just not something you could necessarily put $1 to. I would say there's a spectrum there and by technology. So for example, in a commercial office setting, if you wanted to apply intelligence to your HVAC systems, you could likely deploy that technology on we'll call it the simple execution that might really focus around indoor air quality measurement, maximizing the use of free cooling, right? Using outside air in these shoulder seasons to cool your building as opposed to running your compressors. Something like that could be as little as $1 a square foot and have an anticipated simple ROI or ROU payback of around 1 to 2 years. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, if you're on a looking for comfort management on perhaps a per office level, and you want to have individual controls down to the individual user, you could be spending $4, $5, $6 a square foot for that particular deployment. Now, that's not obviously a check a box and give you a full intelligent building, right? That's just one discipline around intelligent HVAC. But again, for an ROI, ROU comparison, that might be looking more like a 5 or 6 year ROI payback, depending on a few key drivers. So that's one perspective. I don't know if Brad, do you have any insights or thoughts around anticipated costs?
Yeah, I appreciate you're able to pin some dollar amounts to it because, Kevin's right. It is really a range depending on what each individual needs. And a couple of things. So I guess the first thing that I'd say is that a lot of times what we're doing is working with a client and advising them to start where they're at. They already have a lot of these systems in their buildings. And so a lot of times it's not having to upgrade or add systems. It's looking at how we take all the information that those systems are collecting independently and try and tie that together to be able to manage the building more efficiently, to be able to give insight from a dashboard for the property manager over their entire portfolio, being able to give those occupants a little bit more control over their environment and access to amenities, and just rolling all those things up into, well, sometimes referred to as a single pane of glass. So one integrated platform you're able to see all this information in. And so some clients will be interested in bringing together a building automation system and lighting control and electrical energy and alarming. And that's becoming pretty baseline right now. And it really depends on how extensive each of those systems are implemented already. But yeah, really when you think about it as leveraging the existing capital investment, at that point, it's just data integration and programming. You're not having to actually add any equipment, buy things. And that varies so much, it's difficult to be able to put a cost on, unlike being able to say if you're buying hardware. That ties a little better to square footage compared to the data integration, which is something that is a little bit more based on how many points are you pulling together. So I see $40 per point, which unless you really have a good quantity of what points you plan to bring in, it's a little bit more nebulous of a concept. The other part of it is it's a little challenging to try and put an ROI calculation to what the impact is going to be. When you're measuring energy, that's fairly linear calculation to be able to get that payback. But when you're looking at things like an impact to well-being, you could be looking at some metrics like absenteeism and healthcare claims and things like that. But it's a little more difficult to be able to correlate what are the impacts of what we're doing with the building on some of those metrics compared to what are some of the other health and well-being programs that have been implemented. So it's just a little bit softer types of metrics there. So we tend to talk a little more about return on value rather than return on investment. And the other part of this is that some of the intelligence part of the intelligent building is the ability for these systems to be able to push the information to those operators just when they need it. So sort of like if you're using a Google phone and it's able to tell you, hey, your route from work to back home is probably about 30 minutes today. It's normally 20 minutes. You might want to leave a little bit early because of traffic, and you haven't programmed in where your work is or where your home is, but it's figured that out and it's able to surface that information to you even before you knew that you needed it. So that's what the intelligent part of some of these intelligent systems is able to do. And in that case, it's difficult to measure what that return on investment is because it's dependent on what sort of action that the building operators take. So if they go and address all the things that come up in their monthly reports for preventative maintenance, then they're going to be out ahead compared to somebody who gets all that information and chooses not to do anything with it. So there's just so much that's dependent on how somebody acts on that actionable intelligence. Steve, would you like to add anything?
Sorry, I had muted myself. Brad, you did an excellent job on describing that. I would just add that there's also ways to look at this from a new construction versus a retrofit perspective. So I believe that as people are getting more aware of some of the capabilities that, Brad was describing on making all of these systems more improving the ability to integrate them and ability to share data and to leverage some of the technology that's coming into the market. And HGA is really, I think, a pioneer in this, and I give them a lot of credit for helping educate owners and really introduce this concept into new construction. So if you're introducing these ideas and concepts for an intelligent building and new construction, I don't know if it really costs that much more than doing it the old way and thinking about all of these technologies as separate, disparate systems. And so I think that's an important thing to think of, is if you're considering new construction, if you're considering building something, I really think you should, take a hard look at understanding how these systems can integrate. And then if you're in a retrofit type of conversation, maybe you have an old system that just needs to be updated because it's failing and breaking. I think in that context, it's really looking at what your needs are at the specific time, and then asking those various technology manufacturers, how could they fit into this type of environment? And one of the things that the big TC talks about a lot is really being flexible and being open and not being locked into specific, I'll say, manufacturers. And there's a lot of things we could talk about from a technical perspective on that, but that's how I think about it, and that's how I see it playing out in the field. It is hard to build the full ROI case like we talked about, but if we break it apart a little bit like that, I think it helps.
Steve, I want to just jump in with one more point, and I think you're bringing it full circle here really, really beautifully. As I mentioned at the top of the call, more and more technologies are becoming connected, but I do believe the onus is actually on owners and operators to challenge the status quo of what is being spec'd for their buildings, and do some of their own homework if they are interested in having connected technology. And specifically around costs, I'm now working in a plumbing industry, and the thing that surprises me is, we're obviously moving to a very touchless post-COVID world, especially in a restroom. There is a negligible cost increase to going to a connected, intelligent faucet and flush valve, for example. But the difference is you are now including a SaaS, or a software as a service fee, onto something as simple as a faucet, right? Because it's reporting data and it's enabling owners and operators to be actionable, whether it's to ensure CDC compliance in hand washing, or to know that there's an issue in a restroom and to be able to be proactive with servicing that area. So it's a little bit of a different mindset, because while the actual hardware costs might be incrementally different from a non-connected technology, you are now looking at often a software as a service fee in order to collect all that data and have actionable intelligence around that.
Yeah, Adam, I'd like to add something too, because I think the way you started that was really important. And it's important that owners and operators do really, I'll say, challenge their service providers around these fronts, and really be open to innovative and creative ideas. What I've seen, and I'm sure Brad and Adam have seen the same thing, is there are a lot of new innovative technology companies. Adam used to work at 75F. They've clearly fall into that category. And so there's some new ways of doing things, whether it be through newer technologies, whether it be software as a service. And those technologies can be significantly less expensive than the way companies have done some things in the past. So I think it's important to be open and receptive to some of those things, because I'm seeing it right now. We're doing an RFP for some advanced security technology, and there's some new providers that are fractions of the cost of what the owner hard spec'd a product. And I just don't know if that's the best way to do it in the future, or really kind of challenge the industry to give you the good ideas, to be creative, and then to, you know, bring that value. It's a different mindset, but I know that's something that we've talked a lot about at the Big TC, and it would be interesting to see what people think about that as well.
And maybe as a transition to our next slide, I'll piggyback on that and say that it's important as you're picking out technologies, as you're you know, seeing things that are aging out, that you look at the entire ecosystem rather than just looking at these as individual point solutions. Because our biggest, I think our biggest failure as a consultant would be setting people up with a system that is not scalable and expandable and will not talk to other systems. So while they may not have that as an interest day one, shortly down the road, it's something we expect that they're going to want to do. And if they have to completely forklift upgrade, rip and replace things out to be able to make these things interoperable and get the intelligence out of them you want, that's a failure on our part. So we really have to understand individual needs for each of the different organizations we're working with. It's different if it's a you know, a retrofit of an existing. It's different if we're talking about a healthcare building versus when we're talking about an office building. So we need to exercise a process when we work with our customers to really understand what their big picture goals are, and then we educate them on what the possibilities are for their industries and give their feedback on the perceived value that that will have. And that's how we put together a priority list that helps us say, all right, everything that we can get into the budget for innovation, we're going to move forward with in this project, and there's other things that don't fit that budget, we're going to put on that roadmap so you have a strategy and how to be able to implement those things in the future once funds are available, or once you do recognize that there's a need to be able to implement some of those use cases. I want to make sure we have time to get to some of our COVID topics, but Adam, Steve, is there anything you wanted to share in terms of how one size does not fit all for intelligent building? Part of what makes it a difficult definition for intelligent building.
As you guys are thinking through this one, we do have some questions that are coming in. We continue to talk about a connected building, a connected system, connected technologies. There's some questions around how these things are connected. Are they hardwired in? Is it low voltage? Are they wireless? And I would imagine the answer to that question also is going to impact what a current retrofit of a building looks like versus a future retrofit of a building. If we do move to more of a wireless technology, and you know, there isn't a need to rip and replace in terms of getting in ceilings and walls and things of that nature. Can you talk a little bit, when you do think about this one size does not fit all, that's probably around solutions and different use cases, as well as the way that a technology would be deployed within an environment?
Absolutely. Let me jump in on that. And by the way, I think these things are really related. So to the point of in hardwired versus low voltage, that's very much, you know, system dependent. More and more of these systems are moving to a low voltage application, which can generally reduce the installation cost versus a line voltage type control situation. More and more technology advancements mean wireless communications as well. Again, at a very high level, Brad alluded to this, when you're moving to a wireless communicating system of sensors, the key there is ultimately to have interoperable communications, right? So if you're talking about an HVAC system, all of those different sensors might be speaking wirelessly. It goes back to a central point or gateway. That information is often sent to the cloud, right? But it's the ability to connect to the cloud or to the local gateway device and be able to share that data to other systems. That's a cornerstone of an intelligent building. The other thing I guess I would just mention is that if you're in a large application like a stadium or a convention center, it might make sense based on the use to run some hardwired applications. Whereas if you're in a commercial office building where it's, we'll say, less less intense use. It's a 5-day a week, and there's a medium density in the space. Wireless communication and or battery operated devices, specifically around plumbing applications, are much more common, and that speed of retrofit goes up dramatically, right? There is no one size fits all, but I think I answered a few of those questions, that you should be seeing more and more wireless potential for communication of intelligent systems, and usually a combination of low voltage or full wireless battery operated devices. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, this is Steve. So I'll piggyback on that, and I think Adam described it very well. What we're seeing in the, I'll say so the fire life safety industry, as most people know, is a relatively slow moving industry. So in that industry, hardwired is still the norm. There are discussions, there are conversations about different ways for doing fire life safety systems. I think those are going to change extremely slowly. But what we are seeing is an explosion of all the other sensors, I'm going to say, in the building technologies area that are battery powered, that are wireless, and that are using various levels of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and various types of technologies. That's just really starting to happen right now, and it's probably going to take the industry, my guess is about 18 months to really start producing a really large quantity of those types of devices. So I think it's going to be a combination of hardwired and wireless devices using artificial intelligence and machine learning, combining all of these types of systems together in an open compute type of environment. It'll probably be going up to the cloud using AWS or Azure or some of these different cloud providers, and starting to see that evolution occur. That's what I'm starting to see.
And I've got just a couple of comments to wrap this topic up for us. Having a wireless sensor is not a prerequisite for being an intelligent sensor. So we kind of look at infrastructure separately from what it is that we want to be able to do with that device. And it was really about the data you're collecting out of those devices. So how it comes to be able to be shared with their systems doesn't necessarily impact the way that we're going to be thinking about how we use that to turn that into something that's actionable. I've heard it said that the best thing about wireless is that you don't have to deal with wires, and the best thing about wires, you don't have to deal with wireless. And that's because you don't, you get in especially large commercial buildings or healthcare buildings, and that spectrum management on wireless becomes a challenge. And so that's another thing that you have to try and manage. If we're looking at having retrofit and being able to rapidly deploy things as a part of a COVID response, I expect we're going to see a lot more wireless that can go into existing spaces. It's just easier to put that in there. But like I say, it doesn't have to be. You're still able to find a lot of hardwired intelligent systems, and for the majority of our new construction, we're still running a lot of wires for that. But I think we're doing a little bit less of trying to make sure that we have the preparations, for rough-ins in the wall, getting boxes and conduits up before we put the drywall up that we used to do, because we say no, our mitigation for when you want to add something in the future will be planned for that to be wireless.
That's a great point, Brad. One last thought too is, there's an inherent exchange between wire versus wireless. The upfront cost is greater in a wired application, clearly, as you just described. But the long-term cost when you do a wireless application, you do have to remember that depending on how many hundreds or potentially even thousands of these sensors are being deployed, they have finite battery life that will need to be replaced. And a full calculation that includes a burden of perhaps every 2 to 5 years, sweeping a building and replacing all of those batteries has to be a part of the calculation for a purchase.
And those sensors are getting so cheap. We're seeing a little more of a trend to putting those sensors that are deployed for 2 to 5 years, and then you replace that sensor at the end of that time rather than replacing the battery because the technology has come so far.
Great point.
So we've managed to talk for 45 minutes roughly and not brought up COVID-19, which is a first for 99% of the meetings I've been on in the last 6 to 7 weeks. But I do think it's important to address kind of what impact COVID has on intelligent buildings, on, you know, deploying solutions like this. Adam, you brought the bathroom up earlier. If we want to skip to the next slide and start to talk a little bit about what type of solutions, you know, building owners are going to be looking for, tenants in those buildings are going to be looking for when it comes to, you know, safety and sanitation. We did have a question, which is kind of on the heels of your comment earlier, Adam, was restrooms, and, you know, there being kind of automation in restrooms within JLL. We've been having a number of conversations with, you know, our leasing team, and they are talking with owners about building 2 doors to a restroom, essentially an entrance and an exit. So you've got the flow of traffic going one way. What do you see when you're thinking about returning to work and people getting kind of back to their day-to-day lives operating within an office building? What types of technologies do you think are going to become more prevalent and probably less of a concern when it comes to a hard dollar ROI for a building owner or a building manager than it was prior to COVID?
That's a great segue. And I think everybody on the call is probably okay with the fact that we didn't just dive right into COVID. We've been swimming in it for months now. But you know, I think the point I wanted to make on this entire presentation is that intelligent building technology has come a long way, and I think early adopters were using it for a variety of reasons. But now that we're living in a COVID world, and hopefully soon a post-COVID world, with things starting to open back up again, you know, I think people can look through a new lens at this intelligent building technology as, quite frankly, one of those answers to how to compete against or beat a COVID environment issue. And I know the question was around public restrooms. You know, the question was, do you need to have people sanitize after each person uses the facility during a virus issue? I mean, I went to Target yesterday and they do a full reset between each purchase, right, as you're standing in the line, and everybody's wearing masks and it's completely sanitized. What I would say in the restroom environment, the word is touchless. There shouldn't really be a need to touch hardly anything in a restroom. Your point, Kevin, about you know, 2 separate entrances for traffic flow is a very good one. We're seeing other technology as well around adding like a light indicator outside the door that lets you know if the restroom is occupied and full. Whether it's in a smaller restroom environment with like or a larger one, to eliminate the I guess the issue of walking into a restroom that is already have people waiting. So with social distancing in mind, we can leverage those technology pieces to keep people spaced and healthy. And from a touchless standpoint, whether it's the faucets or the flush valves, they're really sensor technologies come a long way. Those exist in many shapes and sizes. They also are now connected, as I mentioned, meaning that not only do you have a touchless environment, but you can aggregate all that data. And even the newest stuff is reporting CDC compliant hand washing, meaning that you know that folks are doing a 30-second hand wash and it's verified through the sensor inputs. I'll pass it over to the other guys to provide some context in other parts of the building. But I think this is so topical today. I mean, we're seeing companies deploying their post-COVID solutions around social distancing, masks, doors being open, et cetera. This is certainly the right time to have this conversation.
Kevin, I want to make sure you get a chance to throw your second poll question up there. Do you want to put that up and then I can share some thoughts while people are responding?
Yeah, definitely. We will get that thrown up here so the folks that are looking for CE can get that, and then we'll you know, wrap up with probably a couple minutes of question and answer. So if people have outstanding questions, Obviously, feel free to submit those via the chat. And Brad, you can kind of press on while we're waiting for people to respond to the poll.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on the restroom question and kind of use that as an illustration for several different ways that the technologies give that intelligence to be able to help influence decision-making of the operators and the occupants of the building, as well as the owners. So in restrooms, I guess one step back here to one of the systems that people have been interested in, but hasn't necessarily been adopted as rapidly as the manufacturers of these technologies or the proponents of them had expected, is the people counting technology that's able to give you some information on utilization. So it might have been a nice to have pre-COVID to be able to know how many people are on a floor, are desks occupied, and be able to use some of that insight for making real estate decisions, or for the property managers to be able to get some of that intelligence and help to offer insights to their tenants with it. Moving from a nice to have to a little bit more of a must have now in a post-COVID world, looking at things like the restroom and being able to do people counting and to know what load that restroom has had, and based on actual number of people who have used it, being able to formulate cleaning schedules rather than having to pick them up based on a time of day schedule. So that's just one example. And before I take a look at the poll questions here, I wanted to get one more example where people counting becomes something that you can start to see how it influences many different integrated systems. So if you were able to count how many people are in a conference room, let's say, you want to be able to not only have that for being able to understand where you want to be able to invest your money for the technology, knowing we don't really use these 10-person conference rooms, we use a lot of these 2-person conference rooms, or recognizing we got 2 people in these 10-person conference rooms and we're always short on conference rooms. So we need to think a bit different about how we do that or where we want to put the AV technology. But then also, when you know how many people are in those conference rooms, part of being predictive and proactive would be tying it in with the heating and ventilation system and being able to ramp up the cooling in a room when you go from having 2 people to 6 people. So before somebody has to go over and actually manually adjust the temperature in the room, that system is able to recognize the conditions and proactively make that adjustment. So that's really illustrative of the point of these are things that you could do now. We're adding convenience to them by making it happen already without having somebody have to take intervention and do it manually, but also into COVID being able to recognize when you have too many people in a space that could be generating a port, or that somebody could take action on and reconfigure how those spaces are set up so that you're able to provide that distance. You're able to address the load of people and start crafting policy around the insights that you're getting.
Thanks, Brad. And we did get the results back. I think they're probably up on everybody's screen, but about 68% of you said that you would be considering upgrading connected technology where you work. And the nice thing about this is it can be done really at any level. It can be done as a occupier of a suite within a building. It can be done by a building owner. It can be done by developers that are putting buildings up for the first time. Can each of you give us kind of 30, 40 seconds on what the best way to get started would be? This is obviously somewhat overwhelming for a lot of people because you say, hey, we want to leverage technology. And it's like, well, what can we do? Well, you can really do anything under the sun, which can be overwhelming for people when there's that many choices out there. What do you think the, 1 or 2 kind of most frequently used intelligent environment solutions are? And then what is the best way for folks to start the conversation either internally within their organization or externally to try to get some type of rough budget that they can bring to their senior leadership team to start the conversation?
This is Steve. I'll take a second to do a shameless plug for the Big TC group. I'd encourage people, and the group is it's open to everybody, and it's an opportunity to get to meet and really learn about these systems. And Brad is as we talked about, kind of our de facto leader. So I figured I would give the shameless plug for this rather than make Brad feel uncomfortable, but I mean, we don't push any technologies. It's really just wide open brainstorming type of ideas. And can we do this? Can we do that? And, you know, kind of our bylaws, we're all committed to working together in a very, very, I'll say, industry customer focused type of manner. So it's a really safe place to come to learn about these things and to talk about, you know, maybe challenges you might be having, or, you know, just things that you would like to ask a diverse group of people on, and you'll get all kinds of different ideas, and you can take those back and go from there. So that's one of the first things that I would do.
Steve, it's a good point. You know, we only have 50 minutes together today to talk about a tremendously large topic. I think my point to the group would be, you know, everybody's building is different. Your use case is different. I would start by better understanding your users, whether it's in survey, polling, et cetera, understanding what operational and behavioral changes are going to be necessary to maintain the health, and safety of the users of your space. And ultimately, that data will help drive an understanding of what areas you might want to first look at for intelligent building products, whether it's touchless, whether it's around the people counting and better understanding space utilization. I think that data will help really drive the decision making.
And I would advise people to be considering both high-tech and low-tech solutions for any one of these problems. So things like going touchless. You could be making more of your doors have auto operators on them that have a touchless actuator. As you wave your hand past it, that door will open. Or as you use your badge, that ties into the operator and opens the door for you. There's that option, or the lower cost version of that would be putting hand sanitizers on both sides of the door. In the conference room, we are speculating whether this is going to be the death of those touchscreen controllers that everybody loves so much anyway. So simplifying those conference rooms so you don't have to be everybody touching those things. Does that mean that now we put more voice control in rooms? And I think we'll see some more of that, because the risk calculus has changed from is Amazon going to be eavesdropping on me when I say those things, or, you know, to more of, well, if I don't risk getting a potentially deadly infection, that's less risk to be able to have Amazon in my conference room than what it previously had been perceived. But the other low-tech option there would be give everybody a stylus and let them use that to touch the touchscreens and you know, put the Lysol wipes out there on the table so people are able to sanitize after they get done using the room. So think about things in both directions. Definitely agree with Adam. Use that polling for being able to understand where people are most concerned with the risks that they're going to have to be taking on, because it is a part of our daily lives that we're just going to have to accept. We can all work together to manage it and reach that consensus for what we're all able to tolerate.
Kevin, are you next up, or should we?
Oh, yes. Sorry, but I was on mute talking to myself. This is the story of my life. I was just going to say, Tony's got one or two questions that he wants to be sure get addressed, but you guys have been talking a lot about polling and going out to the staff and asking them, you know, what they want. Is there kind of a generic poll or survey that people can distribute to their team members to collect information that would be relevant, or how would they know what to ask?
Kevin, do you have any sort of a follow-up link to this, or we could put some links to resources? Because there are some things that we've been putting together that I'd be happy to share. They're pretty generic. We've got some resources, yeah, like signage that people could print out or have fabricated that you could put up around your office to illustrate some of those, which direction are you supposed to walk around the office, and helping tell people when things have been cleaned. What's the maximum occupant load in a conference room now? A few of those resources I'd be very happy to share.
Perfect. That's awesome. And I'll flip it to Tony, because Tony and the NAIOP staff are the ones that would help with that follow-up. So from me, thanks everybody for hopping on, and I'll flip it to Tony.
Yeah, Brad, on yours, yeah, absolutely. We will have a post-event circulation to the attendees and participants, so such a thing would be great for that. Thank you. I'm looking at the questions. I'm going to come to Beth, I think, Beth Dutcher. Do you have a question you could ask live?
Maybe.
Maybe. I do have another one just as Beth is getting set up there. And she can jump in anytime if you want, Beth. Otherwise, I'm getting questions on, touched on it a bit, but just anything else on the basic side of employee arrival and departure, elevator use, things like that, that could be a subject of a quick comment.
This is Steve. So we are seeing a lot of interest in making that whole arrival, that whole process to be completely touchless. We're seeing people using a wide variety of technologies. We're seeing people use facial detection to automatically and seamlessly unlock a door. So we know who's authorized to come in, we know who's not authorized to come in, and the doors just open up. You don't have to touch them. We're seeing the, if any of you have seen those visitor registration systems, or, when people kind of come in, we're seeing voice commands being used instead of touching the screens, kind of like Brad alluded to. So all of those capabilities are available. They do exist. People are asking about them and looking at them. Maybe, some people are doing them today, and some people are just planning to do it in the future. But I think that's going to be all that COVID, in my opinion, is going to do is accelerate the interest. And we've kind of seen it in the polling. More and more people are going to be looking for these buildings to be more intelligent, more connected. And in my mind, all of these things that we've been kind of talking about for a long time, we're just going to move forward at warp speed.
Yeah, we have the technology adoption bullet point on there that we didn't really speak to explicitly, but we're seeing all of that, just us using this webinar technology instead of being able to meet in person, and people adapting and having to do it really rapidly. The way that IT departments had to put in VPNs or beef up the policies they had for people to be able to connect remotely to work from home. So I think a lot of these things that had been slowly, being adopted by people or on people's roadmaps have now moved up pretty quickly, and we're going to have to be prepared to be able to start implementing some of these things. One of the bottlenecks we keep hearing from our clients is that the screening process is something that they're looking to be able to offload rather than having to screen everybody at the door. Temperature scans are something you'll have to do in person, but just being able to answer some of those health questions about are you sick, have you been exposed, that being able to offload that to give people sort of that health passport, so when they walk up to the building they can go to the fast track line, sort of like your TSA pre-check. That interest there, and I see that being something that could be rolled into tools that have been around for a while but have been slow to be adopted, which would be tenant engagement app or an occupant engagement app. Also it was like a workplace experience app where you're able to put a lot of that building information into a portal that you can give to the occupants. They could use their mobile device for being able to unlock the card access system and get in the building, be able to do some wayfinding and navigation. Maybe you're on a campus, you don't go to that campus very often, you're visiting from out of town or out of state, be able to get directions to where you need to go. Rolling all this stuff into what becomes this full service application. So I could envision more of that becoming ways you're communicating with people and being able to get some of that input from them even when they're not on the premises.
Kevin, I think we're covered on audience questions right now. I saw additional one or two on the automatic door openers. I think people are very much looking for quick hitting kind of solutions. If there's any other additional comments on the range or the simplicities, the supply of how to make that type of noticeable entrance exit automatic door opener type of adjustment.
Yeah, this is Adam Beson. Just a quick comment on those automatic doors. I think to Brad's point, there's a sort of a low tech low-cost solution that probably started in the restroom, whether it was you can use like a foothold to open and close a door. There's also a new handle that uses your forearm as opposed to actually using your hand. Some materials like copper that are naturally sanitizing are becoming more in vogue. But obviously, a full automatic door opener that's a touchless experience is perhaps best in class, but it also comes with a more significant cost to implement. But depending on your budgets and need of volume of doors, I think the whole spectrum are worth looking at and moving to that sort of touchless environment as people are becoming clearly very concerned with having to touch almost anything in a commercial space.
Thanks, Adam. Any closing comments from Brad or Steve?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone for their time, and it's a great discussion. Like we said, we could talk about this at length, and I think we're just scratching the surface of the discussion.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. There are a lot of things that we had prepped that we didn't have time to get to. So maybe I'll second Steve's plug for the Building Intelligence Group. You can find that at buildingintelligencegroup.org and sign up through our website to be invited to those meetings. They're roughly on a monthly cadence. I think we're slowing down a little bit now that we don't have some more of the networking opportunities, but we're still putting on some webinars a lot like this, and always interested in cross collaboration with other groups that are interested, because this is such a broad topic that there's something for everybody. And it's a great way to be able to meet people who have knowledge about this and learn more about some of the specific solutions, get connected with the providers.
Perfect. Thanks, Brad. And we'll include that link as a follow-up from the NAIOP staff as well, so everybody can find the Big TC group. I think that's it. If anyone has any additional questions or is looking for follow-up information, obviously feel free to reach out to Brad or Adam or Steve, and they can get you pointed in the right direction if you're looking for some additional information on this topic. So thank you everyone for hopping on today, and I hope everyone found it to be beneficial.
Thanks everybody for joining.
Yep.
Stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Have a great day.